Welcome, I'm Jay Capistrano with Capistrano Builders. The purpose of this video is to encourage people to try woodworking. But as a famous woodworker once said, before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to operate your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more greater safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. So let's get started. So today we're going to be building this tissue box holder, and it slides right over the top of your standard tissue box. And step one was to measure the box and see what we came up with. So I measured it and I came up with 4.5 inches across approximately and about 5 inches tall. So that dictates the size of the tissue box and the opening and that kind of thing. So what I ended up doing was measuring 5.25 inches for the height of this, and that's going to give us a little bit of slack inside there, so there's just it's not tight, and that'll be important when it comes to pulling the tissues out. And I also went bigger on the sides just so it wasn't tight, and I'll show you those measurements in a minute. So for this project I'm using 3/16 oak veneer plywood. It's a scrap that I had in the shop, and I know that the grain is going vertical on the sides of this one, and the grain on this piece is running this way. So I'll be cutting my sides out, and I'm going to go 5.25 inches for each side because the tissue box is 5 inches and I wanted that quarter at the bottom. So when I multiply that out, that's 21 inches, and I decided to mark it at 22 so that I can have room for saw cuts coming down. The other thing, I'm going to make the sides 5 inches, so I'll be ripping that on the table saw as well. The first cut's going to be this 22, and then I'll start setting the table saw up for 5.25, or 5.25, and I'll start cutting the pieces out this way. So we'll rip it at 5 after we cut this first one at 22. So I'll set the fence at 22 inches. And this will be the first cut. Now I'm going to set the fence at 5 inches for the sides. Now the next setting will be the 5.25 inch. So here's the 4 pieces cut. They're 5.25 inches high and they're 5 inches wide. And what I did was I took some scrap block from around the shop. I cut these at 4 13/16, and I glued them together, and that's going to be my setup piece when I put these together like this. And I don't know if you can see how they're overlapped at each corner, but that's how they're going to sit. Each one overlaps the other one, and if I turned it up right, it'd be better. And then this one sits in here like so. So I'll glue these up one corner at a time, and it just helps me keep it square, and then we'll let that set up. So for gluing it, I'm just going to put a strip on one corner and hold it in place, and then go to the next corner and so on. So now that we know how this is going to sit, we'll take the measurement for the top, and what I came up with for the top piece that lays over these is 5 3/16. So we'll cut that piece out of the remainder of what was cut on the table saw a minute ago. So now we'll set the table saw at 5 3/16. One general tip that I've found works for me is the slower that I go when I'm going through a blade, whether it's on this saw or the miter saw, the slower I go, the smoother the finish I get on the cut. Of course, it depends on how sharp the blade is and which direction I'm cutting, but generally speaking, the slower I go, the smoother I get for a surface afterwards. So this is how the top came out at 5 3/16. It lays on there nice and square. The next step is going to be drilling the hole at the drill press for the tissue to come out. So for drilling the hole in the center of this piece, 5 3/16 across, I came up with 2 19/30. So that's where I'm going to make the mark. So there's 2 19/32 from each direction, and I've got a 2 1/8 inch Forstner bit in the drill press, and I slide it underneath and I have the bit turned sideways so that I can see the point and I know where it's going to come down right in the center of my crosshairs there. I also put a sacrificial block underneath here so I can drill through and there won't be any chip out or splitting and so on. So there's the hole. Came out nice and clean, and before I assemble it finally, I'll take some sandpaper and I'll smooth out the edges around here just so when the tissue pulls through it's not a problem, but came out pretty good right in the center there. So the next step now is just going to be to glue this in place and let it sit and dry for a while, and then I'll be able to start with the quarter round, wrapping it around there. So I'll just start by putting the glue on the top of these, and there we go. So that's it, and we're just going to let it sit and dry. So for marking the 45 on this top piece that's going to go around here, the quarter round, I've already put a 45-degree cut on the end, and when I hold it in place, I'm going to bring it up so it's flush right on the inside corner right there. Then I go to this side and I make a mark that's even with the side of this, the top, and I run it all the way across. And when I got that mark there, I know that the bottom thickness here is a 1/4 inch. So what I want to do is I want to make a 1/4 inch, line a 1/4 inch in from there. So I'll mark it with a tape measure. And that gives me a crosshairs right there. And then I also mark a reasonable 45 on here, just so I know when I set the saw, oh yeah, this is the angle I'm cutting. And I'll keep the blade on the long side of that crosshair so that if anything, the piece will be a little long. But we'll make that cut at the miter saw, and if it's good and I check it on all 4 sides and it's going to work fine, then make 3 others just exactly like it. And I make a mark over on the miter saw table there so I know exactly how far out to go with the point. So we'll do that at the miter saw. So I brought the piece over to the miter saw here. I'm using a piece underneath it just to hold it nice and square, and I don't care if I cut through the back. So when I bring the blade down, I'm watching where those crosshairs are, and if I was going to cut it right on the nose, that's where it would be. But I want to cut it a little bit long just so I have some flex there and there's no problem. So we'll go ahead and make that cut. Okay, so now we got it cut to size, and it sits on here very nicely. I'm happy with the fit all the way around. It's probably hard to see it on the camera, but because it's perfectly square, I checked it and it's going to be fine. So now I'm going to go ahead and make 3 more of these exactly the same size. So this is what it looks like with all the pieces glued on, and it's going to take a little sanding on top, but that's the 45s on the top for the quarter round. Now I'll fill in on the bottom and just bring them, butt them up to there and flush with the bottom here for the square cuts for the quarter round here. So for the next step, we're just going to measure from the bottom of this top quarter round to the bottom of the piece here, and I'm coming up with about 4 15/16. So I'm going to cut 4 of those, and we'll do that at the miter saw. So now that I've got the corner pieces cut and taped in place, it looks like they're going to fit fine. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to hand sand some of these corners and take the sharp edges off. Once that's done, I'll glue these in place, let it dry, and then I'll tack it off with some tack cloth, and it'll be ready to put some polyurethane on. This is 130 grit sandpaper. So I'm using polyurethane that's oil-based, and I'm using a gloss, and I've had pretty good experience with this company, so I continue to use it and stir it up a little bit since it's been sitting on the shelf for a week or so, and then I'm going to be ready to put a coat on here. I already tacked it off, and so it's ready to go. So now I'm going to let this dry, and once it's dry I'll go over it with a 600 wet and dry sandpaper and just take off any dust or any air bubbles, that kind of thing, and I'll take a look at it, and if I'm happy with the finish, that'll be great. Otherwise I may give it a second coat and repeat the process. So this is the tissue box complete. I used wet and dry 600. It's smoothed out real nice. I'm happy with the finish. The tissue box fits in and out nicely. I put felt pads on the bottom, and it'll protect the surface wherever it sits. The tissues come out no problem without ripping or tearing or anything, and that's the bottom line. So next time what we're going to do is we're going to build a step stool just like this one, and this is made out of solid oak with a black walnut inlay, and I've given these as gifts and people seem to appreciate them and use them, so we'll be doing that next time. I would very much appreciate your feedback. If you'd leave me any comments at all in the comment section, that would be wonderful. I appreciate you watching. Thanks again.